Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews, and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the very latest Fly Culture Podcast. My guest today is an author. He's written two of what I think are the most influential fly casting books. He's an artist, poet, instructor. He's written a number of articles for Fly Culture and the online magazine I used to run, Eat, Sleep, Fish too. If you've watched the film A River Runs Through It and thought Brad Pitt was handy with a fly rod, then the reason for this was that my guest today, Jason Borger, was standing for the casting double in the film. It's not an exaggeration to say that fly fishing runs in his veins. I'm extremely excited to be joined today by Jason. How are you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me, Pete. I'm doing fine given all the circumstances and, getting out on the water, at least to do some scouting with the kids and just enjoying it as best we can.
And it's really nice to be able to speak to you today because I feel like I've known you so many years that, like I said in the introduction, the online magazine I did, you were in the first edition of that. And then when I told you I was bringing a fishing magazine, a hard copy, I had to have you in the first one of that. And I was grateful that you sent me an article for that too. So it's really nice to be able to actually speak at last.
It is indeed. And, thanks for including me as well. And especially in, fly culture, which is, I think, just, an outstanding piece of work you've done. You've done something really great there. I mean, it's just pure and beautiful and just about what we do. Not how, but why. And I love that.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you for being part of it. And there's so much I want to talk to you about. And you said, you've been out scouting rivers and of course you can fish. You're based in the Washington area and you can go out, scout some rivers, do a little bit of fishing. Is it about the midge hatches this time for you and you're looking for those rising fish, or how does it work for you this time of year?
I guess it depends on where I am and, what the regulations are for the water and that type of thing. If you can find rising fish any time of the year, all the better. I always say there's fishing and then there's dry fly fishing. That includes trout or tarpon. If you've ever caught tarpon on basically floating flies, it's an amazing experience. So no tarpon here, but of course trout, steelhead, salmon, and then a whole bunch of what people might think of as warm water species. Bluegill, bass, and that's also around. So you can also fish. Local lakes, which is where I like to take the kids a lot of times because it's quick and easy, and sunfish are not particularly demanding, and the kids can have some fun with that. So, the last couple of days we were up pretty high. We were in the snow, looking at some water, and not a whole lot going on insect-wise, but kids had a great time. And my daughter's, there's a trout pool, there's a run, there's that folded water, Dad, you talk about. So that was pretty exciting for me and for her too. She's good. She's ready to go. We're going to go back to that spot actually in May, do some camping and fishing as soon as it opens up.
That sounds awesome. And it must be really exciting. I guess it was inevitable that your children would have rods in their hands from a very young age. It's a difficult one to balance though, isn't it? And I know my daughter, she's a lot older now and doesn't fish a great deal. But as a youngster, I did everything to try and get her enthusiastic about it and the whole process of it, from letting her pick some flies in the fly shop and everything else that went with that. But I guess you've got that added dimension as well of family time in the sense of camping as well.
Yeah. And I think that from a family perspective, we really try to view these things as sort of holistic experiences. I mean, sometimes we're going to go fishing. But other times, and a lot of the times, it's let's go out, let's be out. And, fishing is part of that, but it's not the end all be all while we're out especially with the kids. For me, if I'm going out solo someplace, I'm on it and I'm there all the time, just focusing on fishing, but still loving where I am. But with the kids being able to get out and have that experience is really where it's at. And the fly fishing is part of that. But so is, throwing rocks and kicking in the mud and, running through the forest. So I get all of those things. And for us as a family, my wife came from an outdoors background. She was a backpacker. That was like her big thing. So it's not just sort of this lopsided driving of, the out of doors. It's all of us together. And a lot of times my wife is the one who's like, you need to get your butt out the door and go take those kids. You're right, I do. I need to get out of here. So it's been great. And I really hope that it'll reflect on my kids in the long term, not just for fly fishing, but loving the out there somewhere. That's what's important.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. And I guess having that family time is really, really important because they do grow so quickly, don't they?
Yes, they do. In fact, we look at some photos just from a couple of years ago, and like, who are those kids? They're so little. And now, they're jumping off of rocks and, skittling over logs. And my daughter's, she's 8, and she's ready to basically do everything. She's like, well, as soon as I'm tall enough, Dad, you got to teach me how to drive the truck. Okay. That sounds safe. We'll do that right away. So as soon as she can reach the pedals, we'll go someplace with dirt and she can mess around a little bit. But yeah, they do grow extremely fast, and the days, man, they just fly past. So you gotta do your best to enjoy them. And I think my wife especially has really helped me focus on every single day. You've got to go do something, and that's made a big difference in my life too. I've always had this fishing background, but she's like, yeah, you just got to be out. You just got to be out. So that's made a difference for me and for our kids.
Cool. Like I say, there's so much I want to ask you, and I wanted to, as we're talking about being younger, I guess, that, fishing was obviously a huge part of growing up for you. And also, when did that sort of come into your life? Was that something that went side by side with the life that you were living and you being outside and everything else? When did you realize art was something special for you as well?
Well, I think the art's always kind of been in there. I mean, I look back at some of the stuff that I was, drawing when I was very little, 2-3 years old, scratching on paper and so forth. And I think that there's always been that desire to express either what I'm seeing or feeling, or some combination of that. But I think it probably really took off for me, in those, tween, early teen kind of years where it begins to solidify more as something that you can really do versus something that you're doing. So you can look at it and say, oh, well, I can actually create something that'll go with this, that'll help make this better. And, it lets me express this or that, or just a sensation that of detail that I love, or color or form or texture. And I think it's at that point, at least in my head, where it really began to kind of go out and expand beyond sort of those childhood things, and really have an appreciation for art and illustration on a grander scale.
And then you went on to study filmmaking as well. And was that another expression of art for you?
I think, yeah, definitely. Film is, I guess you can look at it a lot of ways. Sometimes there's this famous saying, some people make movies and some people make films. I look at it all as a big set of possibilities. But I think that the filmmaking is a different kind of artistic expression, but there's regular old art inside of filmmaking. And the first film I worked on, which was A River Runs Through It, one of the things that I did was do some of the storyboards for the fly fishing scenes, which was you're basically drawing a set of images of scenes before the scenes are shot. And that's absolutely direct illustrative art. But yeah, film tells a story in a different way, and you can do different things with it. So I just found it as an extension, a different kind of a very interesting canvas, let's put it that way, versus, some gesso or some paper.
Yeah. And we had in the first edition of Fly Culture some of your artwork that accompanied a piece. And would it be fair to say that the trout are one of the most interesting factors to actually try and capture in artwork?
I think so. For me, I grew up trout fishing and salmon and steelhead. Trout are, my father at the time wrote an article called, Trout, the fish made for fly fishing. Obviously, they're not the only one, but there's just something about them that's just so perfect for the fly. And there's something about them that's so perfect to illustrate and to paint. It's just the color and the shape and the form. I think for me, in painting any fish, trout or otherwise, it's bringing that sensation of reality of the moment. I want that fish, when you see it, to feel like it's there with you. Everybody's had that moment where they see that fish. You got it in your hand for just that briefest moment, or the net or whatever, and you sort of meet eye to eye, and you remember that moment, and you remember what it looked like and it felt like. And so how can I replicate that in different artistic ways that gives you that sense of being there with this two-dimensional thing on a sheet of paper? And for me, that's always been an interesting challenge, and something that if it's successful, is great. It really makes you feel like you've achieved this sense of connection, and you're looking at a sheet of paper with ink and maybe some paint or something on it. It's for me, that's a really interesting connection between myself and the fish, and then representation of that.
It's interesting you use that word connection, because just recently somebody was asking me, why do you salmon fish? And I said it is that where I am, as the listeners will know, there aren't so many salmon, but I don't care. I enjoy the spey casting. I enjoy being there. And for that one moment when the line goes tight, but also that connection with the fish as I release it, that moment I've touched that fish, to me is a deeply profound moment, and quite an emotional moment in some respects, that you have that brief connection with a fish that's travelled so far to come home. And I guess in my little way, that must be what it means to me. But you've got that added dimension of being able to capture that. It's burned in my memory, but being able to capture that down and express that must be deeply cool.
Yeah, I think so. I think that when a little piece is successful, it doesn't have to be a huge painting to be successful. It can be something very tiny, to this little thing you're making. When you look at that, you're like, oh, that's the feeling. I remember that. I remember when I looked at that fish. Or that's the sensation I want. It feels like there's that moment where you're like, the connection happens, especially the connection where it's the disconnection, because that is in some ways, especially depending on where we're fishing and the type of fish we're after, it can be the most important thing. You've sort of had this dance with nature here, this connection with nature, but then as humans, we have that ability to choose, and we can choose to respect that and return that for another time. And that moment when that happens, especially if it's a magnificent fish, something that's just burned into you, and you see it, tail goes, maybe you get a little water in the face or something.
Yeah.
And maybe another time. Maybe we'll connect again, maybe we won't. Maybe I'll never see you again, but it's always there.
Yeah.
And to have that come off a piece of paper is for me an incredibly, it's a very emotional thing. That's what art should be. It should evoke things, whatever that may be, depending on the type of art you're trying to do. But there should be some evoking of emotion or sensation, I feel.
Yeah. I'm still ridiculous that when I go fishing, I shake with excitement, and it does, like we talked about at the beginning, the whole picture, everything about it is what makes it so special, and why I think I'll just keep coming back to this day after day after day. And it is, I think that wider connection with everything makes it so special. Is that, I sense that's the case with yourself as well.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And, it doesn't matter if it's a 6-inch trout on some mountain stream. You pitch that little dry fly out there, you see it coming down, it's going to happen. There's a fish is going to come and take that fly. And if you look at that and that fish comes bolting up, behind a little boulder and smashes your fly, a little splash, and there's, look at where you are. There's a huge snow-capped peak and there's pine trees and all this. It smells great. And if that doesn't evoke something in you, take your rod, put it down, go home. Don't come back. It should evoke something in you. You shouldn't be bored by that. Same thing. I mean, you go someplace and you cast in front of a tarpon that's as long as you are. That better evoke something too. It might evoke a little bit of terror as well. That can do it. But there should be something when that moment happens. And I think that's one of the reasons that people, when they go fly fishing, they have that moment. And then they realize that they're having that moment inside of this everything around them, whether it's the tropics or the mountains or, someplace in the cradle of fly fishing. And you look around yourself and like, this is all right. This is what it's supposed to be. And then that's it. You're done. You can't really move on from that, I don't think. At least not easily. At least I couldn't.
Yeah, me neither. We've talked about a few species there, and this is a bit of an unfair question. I suspect trout probably top it, but running through sort of fish that you love to fish for, do you have favourites, and do you have favourite ways of trying to chase them? Like you said about dry fly, tarpon, steelhead, whatever it may be. Is there anything that I guess the trout does reign supreme, but what else do you enjoy, and how do you enjoy fishing for them?
I think that for me personally, the pinnacle of what I enjoy is sight fishing. If I can see the whole situation in front of me, whether it's a dry fly, nymph, doesn't matter. Trout, tarpon. As the saying goes, I don't think it really matters. It's that whole visual flow. There's the fish and the cast, and the fish turns. And it's coming for the fly, and you can see it happening. Like that, and it's a refusal.
Yeah.
You get that. What did I do? Wrong fly, drag. What happened? So there's that part of it too. It's educational as well. Sometimes you don't succeed, but whether it's a Spring Creek brown trout, I've got memories of that boy, or a Yellowstone cutthroat that rises about this fast, and here's your fly. It's like this. I mean, you've seen that before, right? You can have a sandwich and a cup of coffee before it gets to the fly. Your heart's pounding. Come on, take it. Those moments, that's what matters, is that I've got that visual. I mean, that's the artistic part as well. But I think, as humans, we like to see stuff happen. So for me, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as if I got that sight fishing opportunity, all the better.
It's interesting you mentioned the refusals. So I guess permit must be kind of interesting for you as well.
Refusals are, you learn a lot from various fish over the years, and you learn a lot, I think, sometimes by not catching fish, whether that's even something as simple as taking the kids up for a sunfish. You figure out you'll catch these, you'll catch all of them you want, and the fish comes over. No, they're like little permit. Think of it that way, right? Like not nearly as spooky, but all those types of situations where the fish doesn't take is also sometimes it's interesting, frustrating, especially if it's a fish you really want to catch. But you learn so much more by not always having endless success. It just teaches you to appreciate the whole system a bit more too. You haven't figured everything out, and you probably never will. And especially when it comes to fish like permit, which of course are notorious for what they do to anglers. And what anglers do to themselves in pursuit thereof, or whether it's super spooky brown trout on a lake that's gin clear water, it's 8 inches deep, and you can't cast to them. You cast to them and they spook. What do you do? Well, you got to figure something else out. So I think that no matter where you're fishing or what you're fishing for, it's those moments too that also stick in there. Till next time.
One thing I need to ask you about, and we were talking off mic beforehand about steelhead and some of the rivers there. What is it like to catch those on a skated dry fly? It must be really cool.
I think any fish of that nature, and by that nature, I mean anything that is so tough and so beautiful, but so tough and so willed by nature to go to an ocean, go through all it has to go through an ocean to survive, come back to a river, do its thing, make more of itself, go back to the ocean again, come back again. What an animal, what a creature. And you can connect with that. This little bit of fluff that you skate across the surface. I mean, skating an October caddis on a little run, get that little V wake of that fly out there. And then all of a sudden there's that bulge and, That's why you want to go steelhead fishing. That's why you want to go Atlantic salmon fishing. And, for me, Atlantics in some ways are even, I don't know, I get my heart pounding more than I think any other freshwater fish. Atlantic salmon, I think, is just even number one when it comes to the sheer spectacle of it. And that moment where the fly and the fish are coming together, and you can see it at the last second, and you gotta wait. Otherwise, you gotta feel the tug. It's hard, but it's beautiful.
Nice. We're going to talk about the casting books shortly, but also you teach fly casting and fly fishing. Did you know, what was your motivation for that? Was it to encourage people into our sport, or was it trying to give something back, a combination of all of those sorts of things? When did that sort of start for you?
Well, my father's a university professor, retired. So I grew up in a teaching environment. And my mother was also a teacher as well. So I had this sort of strong exposure to that when I was really young. And my father was doing, and my mother, she also taught fly fishing as well. They were doing fly fishing schools ever since I was 4 years old or something like that. They were actually out there actively doing that. So I guess I grew up with it. And in some ways I wanted to follow along because you're a kid. You want to do what your dad does, or you want to do what your mom does. You're kind of interested in that. But seeing people learn something new about this beautiful thing, fly fishing, and having success. The fly fishing schools that I was involved with as a kid, my parents were involved with, always had the fishing day, or at least part of that time was devoted to fishing. And you take these skills that they'd learned and go and catch fish. And you'd see people just, wow, especially if they'd never fly fished before, or if they'd fly fished for a long time but never had, this really intensely satisfying experience, and they're getting frustrated. And all of a sudden they could learn something new. And boom, there was success. And you could feel it in people. Even as a kid, you can tell, you can see people just like that. You can feel their emotional connection. Something important's happened for them. And I think that that just in combination with liking the sensation of learning something intensely myself and then sharing that information. In some ways, they say teaching makes you learn twice. I'd say teaching makes you learn every time. So for me, it's also about learning as I teach. And I think that goes for anyone who's teaching. You really should be learning as you teach. And I learn as I teach. I learn as I write. I think that's part of it too. It's interesting to me.
Yeah. And I remember, well, I say I remember, it was only a year or so ago I packed up, but I know exactly what you mean about when you see somebody suddenly grow, when the light bulb moment happens and they've caught a trout, they've made a great cast. You can see, can't you, when everything clicks into place and you actually see the person as that light bulb moment actually happens is deeply rewarding. And that feeds you as well, doesn't it? And that's really amazing feeling to be able to pass that on to somebody, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely part of it. No question.
Yeah. So I wanted to come on to your writing and the books. And as I said in the introduction, that you've written a couple. This is the current one, the Single-Handed Fly Casting book. And the reason I believe this is such an important book and why I feel people should own it is because of the way that it's put together. And it's the most common sense guide to fly casting I've seen. And I mean that in the sense of your modular approach and how you build a foundation cast. And then as a result of that, add on the building bricks. So if you wanted to put a reach in or even the corkscrew cast as well. And I remember the first one that I read and I was so engrossed, and it's not blowing smoke up your, I sat and read it in a day because it just fascinated me with the whole process and it made sense. Where did that process start for you in the modular approach? Did that come from your teaching, or was it something that you'd thought long and hard about and a common sense approach to learning fly casting?
Well, it certainly did come from instructing. It came not long after I finished work on River Runs Through It, and I actually moved to Los Angeles because I was doing work in film and TV above and beyond, fly fishing movies, of which there aren't a whole lot of those floating around. So, and I studied film, and so this was they kind of fit together. I was there and I was fishing. There were a lot of people in the film industry who were fly fishers. So I spent a pretty fair amount of my downtime between movies or TV projects or whatever casting. I would go to the Pasadena Casting Club, which is one of the most famous in America, probably one of the most famous in the world, really. The Pasadena Casting Club, and they have a huge pool, clubhouse, and everything. You can go down there and cast. And there are times I spent probably 4, 5, 6 hours a day down there casting and thinking about casting, working through things. And it was kind of one of those days, one of those moments where these things start to come together. You're like, you know what? Looking back at how my father taught and sort of how he approached things, you begin to realize that you're not trying to learn like these highly complex combinations of things that have to happen all at once. And, this is totally different from this. And well, someday you'll learn how to do that cast. You begin to realize, wait a second. If you got this thing, you can turn it into this thing. You can turn it into this thing. And you can add one of these to the end, one of these to the end, make mends. You can go like this to the end, make a curve. And it just kind of hit me suddenly. I was like, oh my gosh, I could do this thing where casting is small chunks. So you don't have to learn all this stuff. You can learn the chunks, and then you learn these little chunks, and you can put them together and make other things. Pretty soon, you have this huge array of casts and mends and so forth, depending on the terminology you use. I tend to be very much a cast and mend kind of guy in terms of how I look at this versus other things. And at that point, it sort of solidified. And it took a while for me to really think it through, to try to come up with something that made sense in written form. It made sense up here, but you got to have it make sense for somebody else. And, it's not an approach for everyone. It isn't. I mean, not everybody thinks about casting or anything else exactly the same way. So some people look at it and go, oh, are you kidding? I can't do that. I'm not going to follow through all that. That's fine. But for a lot of people, though, it's really proven to be a very, like you said, a common sense. Oh, yeah, I could learn this one thing, add some stuff to it, make this really cool stuff that before was kind of mentally beyond reach. And if that happens, then the book's a success. The approach is a success.
And that's where it works really well, like you say, because you can go from that fundamental cast that leads into spay casts, it leads into all the other bits and pieces that we would need as fly anglers to improve and enjoy our fishing as a result of that, and is really easily done. It's really beautifully illustrated as well, so that it is quite clear to see and understand what you're trying to get across. And I guess even drawing, because I once, for our little fishing school, tried to draw some things, and I'm no artist, I have to say, but trying to draw some things that I thought would make some accompanying notes for our students at the end of the day that they'd spent with us to take home and digest and hopefully help. That must have been a colossal task just in itself with the drawings as well.
Yeah, the drawings were intense. I like things to be realistic, not necessarily realistic in terms of making something photorealistic, like some beautifully rendered drawing, but I like it to be realistic in terms of what it depicts. So what I did for my drawings is I went and shot everything in HD slow-mo, and I was able to go in and pick frames, and then I have a process for turning those frames into line art, which involves lots and lots of hand drawing and scanning and multiple versions of Adobe software to get it to do what you want it to do. But in the end, I wanted everything in single-handed fly casting, which is the book you have there. When you look at it, that's what's actually happening. Not, this is sort of an optimized version of what we think is happening. There's lots of what we think is happening going on in fly casting, and I want it to be what's really happening. So that's why I took that particular approach, and that's a very long, hard approach to do. I've also been fortunate enough to have a background with some biomechanics work and research, and one of the people that I worked with had access to a motion capture system And you may be familiar with that. I think we've even probably talked about it at some point in the past. And there you're talking about Lord of the Ringsy kind of stuff, not quite at that level, but still sports medicines, a biomechanics study level stuff. A couple hundred frames a second, 3D recorded via body markers. And that's, as I like to describe it, a euthanizer of pet theories, because that thing will tell you right away in 3 dimensions, and there's no room for interpretation. You can't look at a video frame and say, well, I think that's probably, I want that to happen because I think it should happen. I had a few moments there too where I was like, oh, this is probably how this works. And you look at it on the 3D and you're like, I have to rewrite that later.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's been eye-opening and very interesting and to me, very exciting. And even if you're wrong about something, it's still kind of exciting. It's like, why was I wrong? Now that means that this other thing, now these parts fit together. Now I understand what's going on there. And with that, I've also been fortunate enough to have friends who are actual scientists. So, actual physicists and engineers and so forth to bounce things off of and to do some work with. So in the end, I wanted that book to move closer and closer and closer to what's really happening. And there are still question marks out there. Right? Fly casting is this really interesting thing. Once you get into the math of it, which is not me, I am not that person. But once you start getting into these equations and so forth, and you see all this stuff, wow, this is this incredibly simple thing of flipping a loop out there with a fly attached to the end of it to catch a little trout. It's got all this incredible stuff behind it. So for me, taking that and then trying to simplify it and to trying to make it something understandable, at least is to the best of my knowledge, right? We're always learning. I'm always learning. And trying to make that as right as I can make it is to me something that's important. So hopefully when you look at the book and you see the drawings and you go, hey, that's exactly what the rod looks like there. That's not somebody's idea of what it should look like. That's what it looks like. That's what the line looked like. Those are straight off a video. You can't argue with it. There it is. That's what I'm hoping that people will get from that and feel more confident in their own fly casting as a result. Instead of trying to meet some impossible standard that they don't understand, they can see somebody who's casting for real and has isolated those particular aspects of casting. And they can look right at that and say, okay, that relates to what I'm doing. And I can see that on my own, iPhone video that I took. Same thing. That's cool to me. That's a long answer, but yeah, there we are.
That's the casting geek in me thinking about those biomechanics and how my tracking would show up on there as well.
It's interesting. It doesn't lie. I'll tell you on the see a little wobble there. Look at that.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Where that came from. You figure out everybody's got their own thing going on, with their bodies and certain things introduced. But in the end, if you get the loop goes in the right place, it does what it's supposed to do. And the fly goes in the right place, it does what it's supposed to do. Fish takes it. That's really, in the end, that's what matters. Yeah. The rest of this is fun for the geeks like me.
Yeah.
But you don't have to have that in order to go catch a fish. That's for sure.
What it also does, though, is allow anglers to add something to their armory in an easy to understand way, I guess, as well. And I think that's where it really works for me as an instructor or as a former instructor, that it was easy. That was in my mind the whole time. And so, right, look, this is it. If you're putting a reach in or whatever, there's your cast. And I hope it was okay. Use your, now we're going to add this onto your cast. And people could understand that. It was a really easy and straightforward way to get people to understand stuff.
That's good to hear. And you don't have to do things like, the modular approach that we talk about, and that's outlined in the book. You don't have to go deep into that when you're instructing or even teaching yourself. It's the idea of organization. But then you're teaching yourself. You say, you take this thing and you stick one of these on the end. That's the modular approach. You got it. You don't have to be like, okay, no, Borger called it this, and then he called it this, and you got to do. You don't have to do that. The book just gets down to the nitty gritty of it, so you can take it and interpret it how you need to for yourself.
Yeah, that's really cool. And in the first book, you had some double-handed stuff in there as well. And is that a temptation to perhaps go down that route with the modular and have an out-and-out spaycast or double-handed book? Is that something you've considered or may consider?
Yeah, there's a temptation there. One of the things that I guess is holding me back on that is that I would like to take at least a season and fish with nothing but two-handers, double-handers, or at least switch rods, for everything. Everything. And I think at that point you've got all your aerial casting with the doubles, and you've got spay with the doubles. And a lot of times people think about doubles equals spay, or spay related, as I like to say, because there are a bunch of casts that are sort of these modern assemblages that are based in the spay world, but aren't don't go way back. But the doubles can be used for lots of stuff, and I think I personally would want to just take the time to do that before I did a book on doubles. I think that would just be smart from the perspective of experience and from being able to talk from experience of situations all over the board. Single, no problem. I've had it all over the board, but how many people fish a switch rod for sunfish? I don't know. Probably some people do for fun. I'll tell you why. Because a lightweight switch rod, if it's long enough, is like a tenkara rod, and you can do things with drag with a lightweight switch, or even, I don't care, a 15-foot double-hander. If you're fishing for 8-inch trout, who cares, right? Same thing with tenkara is that you've got this 13, 14-foot rod, and you can do stuff with drag you cannot touch with a standard single-hand rod. You can't do it. So you could take your big old honking double-hander salmon rod out, 15 feet of line out of the end of it, total, including the leader, and kind of, do this sort of thing on your local trout stream. And as long as you keep yourself hidden, you might be able to do things you've never even thought possible in the past. So, I would want to have a lot more experience with every single opportunity with a double before I went in and probably did something like that.
That's really cool. And that gives listeners an insight into your thought process, in that it's not, right, I'm going to write a book that's just going to be about spay casting and catching still-headed salmon, whatever it may be. It's sort of capturing every aspect of the potential of those rods. And I think that's a really interesting insight into your mind and the process behind these things. Yeah,
I guess it comes back to my father and how he sort of approached things. He always try to think outside the norms that we necessarily construct for ourselves. And he was the kind of guy who got me fishing, dry flies on the bottom with split shot, that kind of stuff, and getting the dry fly on the bottom. Because, well, from a biological perspective, here's what's happening with this certain time frame, and these terrestrial insects are getting dumbled under the water during this runoff, beetles and everything else that are down there in the lower water stretches. So it was that kind of thinking that really got me going in terms of the casting part of it as well, and the use of equipment. And I remember the first time I really got introduced to the tenkara side of things too. And that's old as the hills when you get down to it. A pole with a line attached at the end and a fly on the end. Hey, that goes back all the way, right? As far as we have fly fishing, that's pretty much what it was. So it's not like tenkara is something new. It's just that the thought process towards become a lot more, what do you call it? Sort of categorized and finalized and really focused in terms of the modern era. So when I first got a tenkara rod, fished with it, the focus a lot of times was, it's so simple, it's so easy, you don't have to be, you don't have to worry, you can just cast out and let the fly do this or that. And when I thought about it, that is cool and that's a lot of fun, and that kind of brings you back to the origins of fly fishing. But there's another thing going on here, and that is if you do this right, you can use these kinds of rods to do crazy stuff with drag-free approaches, put the fly in places you could never hope to do it otherwise, and keep the fly there. I mean, some of the stuff you could achieve, and that includes double handers. I mean, I've taken some big rods out, 13 for an 8. It's a steelhead rod, and you go out and you fish trout with it for fun. You're not going out there getting super serious about it, but you're lashing a little bit of like a furled leader onto the end, and a little bit of mono and fly, and you're out there and you're doing this kind of thing in a little tiny trout stream. The fly's just dancing, just dance, in a spot you could never achieve otherwise. Bam, fish on it. So that kind of approach, that thinking outside the box, it's just a piece of equipment. Use it how you need to. I think that opens up a lot of possibilities in fly fishing.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting what you said about the dapping the fly, because it's been in my mind as well. I don't know if you know the term. I'm sure you do, dapping, but I'd love to get one of my salmon rods out and the floss line and just dance a fly on a brown trout water somewhere or other, on a lake or loch or whatever it is, and see if I could find a brown trout or a sea trout that way. And it's been something I've been promising myself for a number of years now, and this has inspired me to think about it a little bit more and perhaps give it a go when we can go fishing again.
That would be great. Yeah, pull with some line out of it can do amazing things, but not necessarily in the way it really can. It's simple, but it also opens up some very, I should say, it's simple, very complex situations. At least it can.
Yeah. So you touched on it, and the Golden Gate Club in San Francisco, and you gave me a little sense of what it's about. And it's kind of interesting because the comparisons, and I remember a quote that you said about fly fishing, I think it was a number of years ago, versus other fishing. And if there was this big forest was fishing, and then there's a little shack in there, and that's fly fishing in that forest, and then there's a little shelf, and there was that spey casting or whatever it is. And perhaps those things are still similar from a proportional point of view. But the reason I ask that is because you have all these casting clubs, and I talked about the Golden Gate there, and I read something the other day, and the Pasadena one came up somewhere or other. I can't remember if it's something we were talking about or somebody I was talking to about it recently. And in the UK here, we have sort of a casting club that travels around the UK, and it has 4 or 5 different meetups per year. But in the US, it's different, and the casting aspect of it is a happy byproduct of what we do. But do you think that's interesting that you do have this sort of culture of casting and gatherings of people at these sorts of casting clubs?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it goes back a long ways. The casting club culture in the U.S. goes back quite a ways. And some of these very famous clubs are still very active, which I think is great. Casting for casting's sake can be something incredibly enjoyable. And there are a lot of people that really enjoy the casting as much or more than the actual fishing part of it. It's good for them. If that's what they love, that's what their passion is. And it's a great social thing. Get together, all cast, give each other a hard time. That's one of the best parts of it, right? Comparing each other's technique and talking a little bit, sharing ideas and that type of thing. And just getting on casting, there's something about that the flow of that. This rhythmic flow and the sort of timing of it, this metronomic timing that can take you to a different place. And I think that's one of the reasons why I liked to cast so much when I had the opportunity at Pasadena, why I would go there so much, is it was incredibly relaxing. It would just take me to a different spot. I could be focused in the midst of LA, this huge city, and all this noise, all this stuff going on. And when I couldn't be out fishing someplace, I could go there and just kind of takes you to a different spot. So I think that the casting in and of itself is also just a fascinating thing to do, either alone or with others.
Yeah. And coming back to Golden Gate very, very quickly, how does that work there? Do you just rock up there with a fly rod and start throwing it around and you get talking to people? How does it work? Or do you have to book a slot? Or how does things like that happen over there?
Every casting club I've ever been to, whether it's most famous ones that we've talked about or just a local that's sort of, trying to get itself back together, but they have a pool, wander out, bring a fly rod, cast. Somebody will come over and talk to you, particularly if it's on a weekend, any given Sunday kind of thing. Somebody will be there. You can always strike up a conversation. Met a lot of people that way over the years. Down like the Pasadena Club, for instance, that's where I spent the most of my time in terms of the club scene. You wander down, you cast, and somebody will want to come and talk to you. Especially if they don't know you, and you're somebody new. So that's always interesting. Hey, somebody's into fly casting. Somebody I haven't seen before. Cool. Somebody's into fly fishing. Cool. So you instantly have that bond. You can talk about a loop. You can talk about a trout. You can talk about a fly. You can talk about your grandfather got you into it. There's some connection you can make there. It doesn't matter what background the two of you come from. You have that connection. That's pretty powerful in my opinion. And a club scene like that, organized club scene like that too, I think can really give people some confidence because they can go and there's this beautiful place and there's somebody there who's usually friendly, you hope, and is encouraging and wants to welcome you, because they're really geeky and into this thing too.
I remember a weekend I had, and you may well know Lee Cummings, that he came down and stayed one weekend, and we cast for 3 days solid. And it literally, he drove down, his family came as well. He got out the car, said, I've got this new shooting head, and bless them, they were still sitting in the car. He was unloading his rod, ready to cast, and we just didn't stop for 3 days. And there's a photo at the end of those 3 days, the two of us sort of with arms around each other, and I look absolutely exhausted. But it was just such fun. And like you say, spending time with friends and taking the pee out of each other or whatever it is part of it as well, isn't it?
Absolutely it is. Yeah, there's no question. And, I think sometimes, no matter how good you are, it's more fun to actually blow something and have your friends give you a hard time. I mean, I think that's definitely part of it. I know that's happened to me plenty of times, especially when it comes to the fishing side. The casting side's one thing, you go, we're just trying stuff. The tailing loop doesn't matter. I got it. I'll get next. But you go out there and you blow it on a big fish or something, and you got people with you. Yeah, that camaraderie, even if it's on you, is pretty great. And it could be that for anything, really. But the fly fishing side of it, there's just something about the connection to nature and, this difficulty of trying to fool this creature. And then this little pea-brain trout, throws you the fin. And it's pretty funny. They have those kinds of connections with other people. And to, have those sensations of being with people who are really, truly passionate about what you're doing. You're not just with a bunch of people, you're with people who are passionate. They want to be there badly. So that just comes out in everything, good or bad.
So I always say, and I've said on previous podcasts, if I had to explain it, you wouldn't understand it. And we sort of call people who don't fly fish civilians.
Civvies, yeah. You can't explain fly fishing. Although a friend of mine in college, she said, that looks like a ballet with nature. Wow, ballet with nature. Jeez. Then you got somebody like Christopher Rounds, who actually is a ballet, professional. I don't know if you've ever met Christopher, but he's, you've got that. And you're like, oh, that must be really cool for him, because he's got this fluidic movement in his body, and it just expresses. He's got this artistic expression already when it comes to his fly. When you see his fly casting too, you're like, whoa, that guy has got it going on. So, yeah, I think the fly fishing brings that out.
Cool. Let's move on to the film, because I think it's an interesting time in that I read recently that when A River Runs Through It came out, that there was a 60% spike in new fly anglers coming. And we're seeing, I spoke to a tackle company today, and they were saying, that they're seeing growth in a number of places, be it people buying new tackle because they can't go fishing or can't do other things, or uptick in rod licenses being sold. I know it got, in some circles, a little bit of grief from people that the streams got a little bit more crowded and everything else, but those things, I guess, flatten out over time, and having more people fishing generally is a good thing though, right? Isn't it?
I think that from the perspective of having more people fishing who become passionate about not just the fishing in and of itself, but the resource and what that represents is really where the importance is. Anytime I think you have something romanticized heavily, like fly fishing was in River Runs Through It, even though it wasn't necessarily intended to be romanticized, it was telling the story of a family, love story of the author to his family. And I guess that is romantic, right? But I don't think it was tried to be approached from that perspective of making it into something that, is going to turn into a Hollywood star if you're out there doing it. But if for those people that came in after River and stayed in and found a passion, welcome to fly fishing. And if those people also say, wow, look at this river, this ecosystem, all this, we need to do something to make sure this stays the way it is, or even to fix some of the things that have been done to it over the years. How can I help? Lend my voice, sign a petition, get my waders on and go into the stream and do clean, whatever it is. If there's more passion from that perspective, then more fly anglers, especially respectful fly anglers that really want to be in this because they've found something deep speaks to them, then great. That big surge, died off as well after a few years after we were. But even the year after, when it was, there was the big launch of people into fly fishing, you could still go places, and if you're willing to walk about 400 yards, you're pretty much out of the way. So, I know some people weren't particularly pleased to see quite as many angler wandering around the streams and rivers in Montana, especially since the film was set in Montana. But I think that things have leveled out, and hopefully that as there is this sort of no longer this exponential, but this increasing growth, that we'll have a lot more people who are coming in who recognize what fly fishing requires, which is the ecosystem, not just the fish, not just the water, but everything that's related, the holistic aspect of what creates that. You get that into people's heads, then you've got a very powerful thing going on there, a movement, if you will, of more and more people appreciating that. And I think you can't argue against that, I don't think.
And I guess you're incredibly proud to be a part of that as well. And how did that come about? How did that role for you come about?
I had been working on fly fishing videos since I was 16, shooting them and doing that type of thing. I really was enjoying that aspect of, I wouldn't call it filmmaking. This is, making fly fishing videos, how to. But it led me to eventually pursue film and television as a area of study at university. So I ended up with a degree in film and television production and theory. And it was right when I graduated, they started ramping up River. I knew it was coming. There had been some whisperings that the River Runs Through was going to be made into the film. And it just turned out that those time frames just like that. And the filmmakers got a hold of my father, Gary, and talked to him about fly fishing video and about maybe doing some work with the film in terms of how to shoot certain scenes or how to get maybe this or that effect or how to deal with fish in a certain way and that type of thing. And one thing led to another, and we wound up on set. And then I wound up being in the film, and then wound up actually being in the film. So I sort of went from being a fly fishing production assistant into being a stunt double and a policeman in one scene, driving a car, which was a whole story unto itself. Trust me. Do you know how to? So can you double clutch and do the spark advance? And you got to make sure you got the fuel air mixture. I'll be fine. Don't worry about it. It's good. And but the brakes don't work very well, so you got to stand on them. Yeah, that sounds safe. Okay. I'm in a movie. I don't care. I'm going to go for it, right? Death, maiming, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. So, yeah, it was kind of one of those one thing leads to another type of deals. And ended up working with a guy named John Deach, who was the fly fishing production coordinator. And he and I spent a lot of time together working on, scenes and how things were going to look. And I ended up doing storyboards through that, and eventually wound up actually putting on the clothes and going out there and, frothing the waters a little bit.
And were the rods that you use bamboo rods?
In the close-ups, there are some bamboo rods, yeah. Not all the close-ups are bamboo rods. They're hexagraphs that were painted to look like bamboo. So if you look very carefully, you can see some of the different types of rods that are being used there. And most of the long shots are the carbon rods that have been painted. And then the lines were also, if it's a real close-up, I have the original silk on there. I'm trying to think back, maybe it was Phoenix that supplied the silk. I think it probably was Phoenix that supplied the silk. And then, beyond that, you had this real equipment for the close-ups, and then, plastic fly lines that were silk colored. Almost the same thing, bamboo and silk. They go together so beautifully for the longer shots. So there's a combination of equipment.
Cool. And one of the defining moments from a casting perspective is the famous shadow cast. And I believe you were the person who came up with that. And were you tasked to come up with a cast that looked and covered everything, looked beautiful on camera? Was that a tough ask?
Well, actually, the shadow cast began, the creation of it began before I was ever hired. So John Deitch, who I'd mentioned before, he was in LA and began working on the cast there because it was going to be such a central part of Paul's ascendancy as a fly fisher and as a person in relation to the family. He's sort of ascending to grace via art on this rock out there. So John had started that long before I got hired. And there were some other people that also had input, some local anglers in Montana who would come on and sort of, we were working through some form and how to do certain types of things. But when I got the script before I joined the film, my father and I both read through it, but with not knowing, what work had been done. And we said, we should base that off a Galway cast, or sometimes called a reverse cast. And so we got on set and started talking with John. He's like, "Oh yeah, we're going to do this with a reverse cast." I'm like, "Oh yeah." So we were all kind of thinking, I think, along the same lines, as to, so to speak, as to how this thing should be assembled. And in the end, there's always a few last minute tweaks to get things the way you want them, the way they has to look at going across the water. So there's some of this weird backhanded kind of stuff that makes your rotator cuff want to explode and that type of thing to make the shadow cast work. But it was definitely a collaborative effort. And like I said, you always have a few tweaks to the last second. That's how film works. But in the end, the goal is to cast that shadow across the water and make the rainbows rise, which, of course, as most of us know, tends to make them run versus rise. But, it's a movie. It was set in, early 20th century, and maybe the rainbows weren't quite as smart back then. So it makes good cinematic fly casting for sure.
Yeah, cool. Did any of the cast, as a result of it, pick up a fly rod for the first time and think, actually, I'm going to do a little bit more of that? Did that lead anywhere for any of the cast?
I think it probably did. I don't know if it did long term or not. I know that, cast and crew both, I think, were certainly affected by being in Montana and telling the story and being a part of this type of thing. And I think there were certainly crew members who were really interested in fly fishing and wanted to get more into that. So I think there's certainly some leftovers from that. I mean, I know that at least one of the crew members I've stayed in touch with for years has become a maniac fly fishing as a result of working on the film. And it's like one of his big passions. And there were other people who worked on the film who already fly fished. It wasn't like, everybody came in there without having any background in it. But I think that it definitely sparked some of that. And because it's a story of family too, there's a whole different connection going on there too, above and beyond any fly fishing. You see people kind of, say, "Well, I had a brother," and they kind of trail off, and you're like, "Ooh, it's an affecting story." So I think there was both going on there.
Yeah. And you said it was Montana, as a result, saw the footfall, and the book was set around Florence and Lolo, which is just outside Missoula, and on the Bitterroot and Blackfoot and those rivers there. But you actually filmed it on the Gallatin. Was there a reason for that?
Yeah, the Gallatin was the stunt river. And I think at the time it was probably the river that was in the best shape for filming. There had been a lot of extractive industry stuff that had gone on in the Blackfoot. And after the movie, though, it saw a lot of restoration. And thanks a lot to the Orvis Company, too, for stepping up and doing so much there. They deserve big props for that. But the Gallatin, come on. If anybody who's ever driven up the Gallatin Canyon, the place begs to be photographed. Right? So please take your camera out, take a picture, take a movie, please. It's so beautiful. When you read Norman's words about the half light of the canyon, I mean, the Gallatin Canyon's in half light all the time, except maybe at high noon. The rest of the time, it's always in half light. Yeah, it's just a spectacular place. There's mist and boulders, and it looks like there should be 10-pound rainbows in there. So, I think once they saw a location, once Redford looked at that, and said, that's the spot. There's no question. And absolutely. And that's actually where I started fly fishing in terms of me casting a fly rod, not having a fly rod put to my hand with a fish on the end, but me actually doing this kind of thing. And, set the hook. Whoa. I started fishing on Stormcastle Creek, which flows into the Gallatin, basically 2 miles from where we shot most of the scenes for river, most of the fishing scenes for river. So for me, it was like this big full circle return, coming all the way back to where it started for me. In this gorgeous, ridiculously gorgeous place.
Yeah, I've seen it from the road, and actually talking about my daughter not fishing so much, I think that was almost, actually we've had a spey casting last year, but that was the last time I think she fished with me, and it was a little bit further up the system, just inside the park. And it's a different river there. It's not quite as beautiful, but it was easy to pull over on the road, and she didn't get so bored so quickly, so that we managed to catch a few fish down there. So, but I think I've got unfinished business a little bit further down the line. But talking about the casting as we have done, we're going to start wrapping things up now, but what advice would you give somebody, aside from buying your book, of course, to try and improve their fly casting? What would you recommend that somebody works on to improve it?
Practice, number one. I mean, I know you just said, what should they work on? They should work on practicing. Of course, if you practice all sorts of wrong stuff, you end up perfectly wrong, and you have to unlearn the wrong and figure out the right. And now by right, I don't mean there's only one way to do something, but from a biomechanics perspective, there are certain things that our bodies are well suited to in terms of range of motion and that type of thing, especially if you've got injury or pain or anything like that. But yeah, practice, and try to practice with precision. If you're gonna work on something, don't just get out there and just do 500 of these things. Okay. Get out there and say, okay, I want to do this today. I'm going to try this. I'm going to target out there. I'm going to work on doing this mend, or I'm going to work on doing this kind of cool, funky cast that I saw. I want to focus on that. What happened there? Didn't work. Why? What's going on? You can blame the fly rod, but it's this thing over here that controls the fly rod. The fly rod's a translator, basically. So it tells the line what you want the line to do from here. So always look back here. This is where it's coming from. And if you've got, one of these deals right here, shoot, things like HD 240 frames a second, it's like 10x slow-mo. You can stick one of those things on a picnic table, hold that up with a rock, let it run, and see yourself cast. And you can look at it in slow-mo, and wow, there's what's going on. Good thing I bought that Borger guy's book, even. But anybody's book, anybody's video, you can begin to compare, and you can begin to see what's going on. And especially if you've got live instruction, if you've got a good instructor who's with you at your elbow and can help you shape and form, then you can take that instruction, look at what you're doing, look at what might be in a book or might be in a video, and begin to combine those three things together. And it gets pretty strong. So practice with purpose, I think, is it's an old saying, but I think it's a good one. Practice with purpose. And then don't practice while you're fishing. Practice before you go. Have fun fishing. Work this cool stuff out ahead of time. You might have to try it a few times while you're fishing, but don't try to learn all this stuff while you're fishing. Go fishing to go fishing. Practice ahead of time.
Cool, man. Like that. And it is, the more familiar you are with that rod in your hand, the less you're thinking about it when you're actually on the stream fishing, isn't it? It becomes more natural and not difficult to do. Yeah,
it does at that point. Then you're just doing it on auto. Yeah. You see a situation, you just do what you need to do, versus, what do I do here? I'm not getting all sorts of drag. I don't know what to do. You start panicking, because you want to catch that fish. If you've already got some of this stuff built in, you just do it. That makes a huge difference. In fact, people a lot of times don't even realize how much of a difference it makes until they get some instructions, for instance, and go and apply it. And they're like, oh my gosh, my fishing just totally changed. And all I learned how to do was, this motion or this motion, at the right time and the right way, making it, a certain speed and so forth. And I could do all this really cool stuff I could never achieve before. Boom, success.
Perfect. So if people want to get hold of you, if they want to buy a copy of Single-Handed Fly Casting, how do they go about doing that?
Well, Single-Handed Fly Casting was a limited release book. I did 1,001 copies, and they're sold out. I do have a new book coming, though. And that is, I'm aiming for a June 1 date on that. And I'm also redoing my website right now. So if you go to jasonborger.com, you're going to be greeted by a website does not exist kind of error. But that is in process. So both of those things will be ramping up here over the spring. And there'll be a new book. It won't be quite as geeky as that one. It's going to be a little bit toned down, but all of the information that you would need, the way I look at it, is a fly casting course. If you took 10 days and had an all-inclusive fly casting course, you should be able to go with a single head rod and fish anywhere in the world and be successful. That's what the book's going to be about. You have here are the skills, not every skill in fly casting. That's a 1,000-page book, a 1,500-page book. Here's 280 pages of skills that allow you to catch a fish with a single head rod anywhere on Earth. That's what the goal is going to be. So that'll be coming later this spring. And so for the time being, if you can find a copy of Single-Handed Fly Casting floated around, go ahead and grab one. There may still be some available online that retailers might still have. I just don't have any myself. They're sold out from my perspective, but there's probably still some copies floating around out there for sure.
Cool. While I was looking through that, to give people, as we've talked, if you're watching this on YouTube as well, that you can see some of Jason's artwork that came with the book there, and it gives you a sense of how stunning it actually is as well. So, I look forward to the new book. I wish you every success with that. I don't think you're going to need it. I think it's going to be sellers equally as well as this last one has as well. And it's been awesome to catch up with you, JB, and to talk with you about so many things. I could have had at least another hour and a half chatting, but I know you've got an incredibly busy schedule and you've got up super early your time to talk with me. So thank you so much for that. And thank you, Jason, so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
It really is my pleasure. And let's do this again, since we probably do have at least another hour and a half in us. Let's do it again maybe sometime this year. We can do a follow-up part 2.
That would be fantastic. Perhaps a casting one and a bit of fishing and all that sort of stuff along. That would be brilliant. And I hope at some stage we get to cast a fly on the water together as well.
That's what I hope as well. That's where it really comes all together. So it'd be my great pleasure.
Cool, man.
Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much again. Everyone, this has been the Fly Culture Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one as much as me. As ever, there are many more in the pipeline, so I hope you keep enjoying the Fly Culture Podcast. Thanks so much for listening.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter.